Hello, thank you for being here with me. We are reading the Course Companion Notes. This is the Week 20 study guide. This was concluding the Chapter 9, the Plan of Forgiveness, and moving into Chapter 10, the Religion of the Ego. And this is from day 134 through 140. And we have already read separately, I believe, through 139, section 3. Let me just see. That's correct. We are on section 4. And that is actually Sunday's reading. So I guess I got way ahead of myself. But I'm going to go ahead and read the Course Companion. The videos for the text is in separate videos, and they are dated. They are numbered, day 134 through 139. So they should be easy to find. And this is simply and importantly, sorry. And these are the commentary by Robert Perry. Section overviews and reflections are from Robert Perry, editor of the complete and annotated edition of A Course in Miracles. So I'm going to go ahead and get us caught up with this commentary, reading day 134 through 139, in which I've already read the text and recorded on separate videos. Okay? This is the commentary from the Course Companions, Robert Perry. Day 134, Section 7, the two evaluations. This section is a wonderfully simple one and is aimed at a phenomenon that I think we all experience, providing both an explanation of that phenomenon and means to dispel it. The two evaluations of the title are, of course, the Holy Spirit's and the ego's evaluation of us. The Holy Spirit's evaluation is based on his knowledge of who we are, which means it is both completely certain and completely true. His evaluation of us is incredibly lofty. He sees as possessing true grandeur because he knows that we are an integral part of God himself. He therefore looks on us with love, a love so great we cannot currently conceive of it. The ego's evaluation of us is the opposite. It does not love us, which is a bit odd because it does not know us. It's uncertain about everything, including us. In its uncertainty, it's as if it has incredibly poor eyesight, so that it can't tell if someone approaching it has a menacing grin and is holding up a gun, or has a warm smile and is offering a gift. The ego's uncertainty, in other words, makes it extremely edgy. This is why its range of response is only the short distance between suspiciousness and viciousness. This brings us to the familiar phenomenon I mentioned at the start. The phenomenon is this: you have reacted lovingly to someone, which means that whether you realize it or not, you have responded to the Holy Spirit in you. Have you ever noticed what tends to happen in your mind after you do this? I'll speak for myself and see if you can relate. First, I feel really good because something that seems pure and good came out of me. Then I think, but aren't you getting a little puffed up about what you did? Then I start wondering if it was really so loving after all. I start playing around with the circumstances in my mind, wondering how loving I would have been if the circumstances had been a little different. So, at best, my love was pretty weak, given that a slight change in the breeze could have blown it over. Then I start pondering what other motives may have been present. That sounds like the ego. All that sounds like the ego. And I generally find a few self-serving motives that are good candidates. Those ulterior motives seem peripheral at the time, but maybe they were more central than I realized. If I'm not careful, by the time I'm done, I may just conclude that my ego got all puffed up over what really amounted to a few drops of weak love poured into a cocktail of ulterior motives, which means the predominant feeling may just be shame. Can you relate to this picture? I can, but I think that, when you react out of love, it does make you feel good, and that there's nothing wrong with that. I had a situation yesterday. You can analyze it to death, but who's analyzing it? Love doesn't analyze. I don't believe love analyzes like that. So it's the ego. So you're turning something pretty and beautiful and innocent into something ugly. Anyway, what has happened here? What's happened is that the love was real, okay, even if the ego motives were buzzing around the edges, and that threw my ego into a tizzy. Why? Because this contradicted its picture of me, making it really unsure what I am. I could be a whole different creature than it has assumed. I could be God. I could be of God, excuse me. It therefore feels attack, which causes it to shift from suspiciousness to outright viciousness. What form does that viciousness take? It attacks my motives. It attacks me. In other words, all those thoughts in my head that I described weren't really my thoughts. They were me listening to the voice of my ego. It was trying to drag me back down to its view of me. Like some brilliant and devious lawyer, it was taking evidence for my innocence and tearing it apart so effectively that it turned into evidence for my guilt. I was in danger of leaving the cult compound, and it found a way to so degrade me that I walked back into the fold. It occurs to me that this is how the ego will try to derail the process we saw in yesterday's section. What do we do about this attack from the ego? We shouldn't just attack the ego back. That would simply confirm that it's right about how attacking we are. And we shouldn't focus on arguing with it about the details. Excuse me. Rather, we need to undo it at its foundation. We need to step outside its insane system, identify with a place of sanity, and look back and see the contrast. 2 specific methods are given for doing this. One is to recognize that due to the ego, we now take our littleness and pettiness for granted. Then we need to ask, who granted it? And really ask it. After all the ego's meaningless questions, this at last is a real question. After all the ego's meaningless questions, this is a real question. One that has the power to place the ego's whole system in question. Unless our answer is God, which would be the wrong answer, then the implication is that God has granted us something different, something altogether different. Which would be the wrong answer. Okay. The other specific method is to recognize that our ego has been chattering away in our mind, questioning our value, and saying confidently in response, God Himself is incomplete without me. This is a wonderful practice, which I know many of us have used a lot. The great thing about it is that rather than arguing over details, it overturns the ego at the most fundamental of levels. Day 135, Section 8, Grandeur versus Grandiosity. This is one of those sections that's hard to forget. It's also easy to summarize because the whole thing revolves around 3 concepts: littleness, grandeur, and grandiosity. If we understand each one of them and understand the relationships and interactions between them, we understand the section. Littleness is not hard to understand. Under the ego, our being seems to be contained inside very little boundaries. We seem to be little in size, in power, in goodness, and in value. This littleness is always accompanied by despair. We tend to associate despair with lack of hope that our external lives will improve. But underneath this is a deeper despair, lack of hope that we will ever be something other than little. Grandeur is obviously the complete opposite of littleness. If we truly believed that we possessed grandeur, then all our despair would be solved, and the hope that we haven't even let ourselves feel would be fulfilled. Yet within our littleness, it seems impossible that we could actually possess grandeur. So let's talk about grandeur and what it is. Grandeur is a quality of God's. Who would deny that God has grandeur? Yet He has chosen to share His grandeur with us. His sharing of His grandeur with us was His creation of us. So His grandeur is built into our very being as it is built into everyone's being. This has a number of important implications. First, we did not establish it. It was established by God. Second, nothing that we do or that anyone else does can change it. Nothing can attack it or prevail over it. It does not vary. It merely is. Third, it is not our private, overblown opinion of ourselves existing only in our minds. It is God's view of us. It exists in His mind. Fourth, it is not delusional. It is completely real and therefore compellingly convincing. Fifth, to accept it is not somehow unkind to others, because from our grandeur we can only bless them, affirming their grandeur. Sixth, to accept it is not arrogance, but rather true humility. To accept your littleness is arrogant because it means that you believe that your evaluation of yourself is truer than God's. When your grandeur enters your mind, the ego naturally feels deeply threatened and quickly mobilizes to regain its control. It will tell you that you are insane and argue that grandeur cannot be a real part of you because of the littleness in which it believes. But it has an even better weapon in its arsenal, which brings us to grandiosity. Grandiosity is a counterfeit grandeur. The ego realizes that you like what the competition, God, is offering, so it quickly moves to manufacture its own knockoff. The ego says in effect, yes, you are grand, you are amazing, look how much better you are than others. Look how exalted you are above them. The ego, in my observation, will even make your grandeur the basis for grandiosity. Look how amazing you are, you have experienced your true grandeur. True, everyone has this grandeur, but the rest of them are blind to it. Everyone in the house is asleep but you. You are a rare being indeed. However much grandiosity looks like grandeur, this knockoff is extremely cheap and flimsy. The materials it's made from are completely different. First, it's made out of attack. I'm better than you is obviously an attack. Second, it's made out of littleness. It's just the ego's usual sense of littleness blown up like a big balloon. And like all balloons, this one's at the mercy of every breeze and is easily popped. For at the core of grandiosity is still the belief in littleness. It is an attempt to counteract your littleness based on the belief that the littleness is real. Grandiosity insists you are not little, you're not little, you're not little, because deep down it absolutely believes that you are. As attached, as attached as we are to grandiosity, and everyone is, it just doesn't do it for us. It's just littleness in drag. Also, if we want to go back to my list about grandeur, we can see that grandiosity is the opposite on every count. We did establish it. It is highly variable. It is our private, overblown opinion of ourselves. It is delusional and therefore unconvincing. It is unkind to others. It is arrogant. And given all this, how can we want it? The call of this section, as I see it, is to make a clear distinction between grandeur and grandiosity, to place them in totally different categories in our minds, and then to realize that the former is wholesome and real, and that the latter is unreal and unsatisfying. Now we are in Chapter 9, Review, Day 136, Section 1, Asking for what you want. When I fear God's will, I am actually fearing my own will, which I have pushed down into my unconscious. This is the explanation of unanswered prayer. I am asking for things that deep down in my true will I don't want. I am really asking for nothing. These are not real requests. Rather than believing that my will is different from God's, I need to remember that my true will is to be with God. Section 2. Hearing God's answer in everyone. Even when I pray for healing, a prayer in line with the Course, my attachment to the thought system that caused the sickness can block the answer from reaching my conscious experience. If I would know my prayers are answered, I need to have faith in my brothers and in their holiness. If I do, the Holy Spirit will speak to me through their words and answer my prayers. Section 3, the correction of error. My ego has its idea of what makes sense and is vigilant for my brothers violating this. When they do, I point out and correct their error. Yet by coming from my ego, I am making the same error they are, since the ego is an error. Instead, I need to overlook my brother's error, see the sanity in him, and tell him that he is still right because he is a son of God. This will heal him. Section 4, looking beyond error. The ego's plan for forgiveness is that I first see my brother's error clearly, making it real to me, and then try to overlook it. Yet the first part makes the second part impossible. Real forgiveness means looking past this error from the beginning, thereby keeping it unreal for me. Section 5, the unhealed healer. The theologian believes in the sin in himself and others, and then looks to a distant God to remove it. The therapist believes in the attack in himself and others, but then tells his patient that the attack thoughts are just thoughts and don't matter. Both are making error real and then forgiving it. What really heals is the presence of light in the healer. This light shines on the patient, who then acknowledges its presence, thus proving to the healer it is there. Section 6. The witnesses to your reality. When I accept my brother and see his magnitude, I will give him miracles. This will inspire joy in him. It will awaken him. I can do this even if I have dissociated the joy in me. He will then respond to me with joy, gratitude, and appreciation. And this will then teach me who I am. It will prove to me that the spirit of joy is in me. My brother, then, will become the witness to my reality. This is how I awaken. Section 7, the two evaluations. In me are the Holy Spirit's loving evaluation of me and the ego's unloving evaluation of me. The ego is uncertain who I am and so can only react suspiciously or viciously to me. When I behave lovingly, it shifts to viciousness. He tells me my motives were actually unloving, and in an attempt to win me back to its view of me. It tells me my motives were actually unloving, the ego completely analyzing the situation, in an attempt to win me back to its view of me. I need to question its view and remind myself that God Himself is incomplete without me. Grandeur versus grandiosity, Section 8 of Chapter 9. When I become aware of the grandeur of God in me, my ego experiences threat. It will tell me that grandeur is impossible for me because I am little. It will also try to win me back by offering me grandiosity. Grandiosity, however, is just a cover for littleness, and it is also an attack on others. Accepting my true grandeur is not grandiose, for it was established by God and is unaffected by anything I do. And now we are moving on to Chapter 10, Section 1, The Religion of the Ego. This was day 137, Waking to the Eternal. Perhaps the central purpose of this section is to overturn the idea that things happen to us, uncaused by us, and then exert causation on us, making us feel fearful or loving. This is such a basic part of our experience that it's difficult to imagine being without the belief in this. Yet, that is a great deal of what this section is trying to do, to pry this belief loose from our minds. The basis for denying that things happen outside our will is that nothing is actually outside us. We even have this extreme statement: God created nothing beside you, and nothing beside you exists, for you are part of Him. It's not that He literally only created you, it's that you encompass all His creations just as God encompasses you. This principle has direct implications for the idea in question. Nothing can happen beyond your will because nothing is beyond you. What does it mean to say that nothing can happen beyond yourself? First, it means that your will actually establishes everything that happens to you. This is not a big theme in the Course, but it's definitely there. Second, it means that your will determines how you perceive what happens and thus how you respond to it. So with everything that has ever happened to you, you choose it and then you choose your emotional and behavioral reactions to it. Nothing outside your will has ever happened to you. How then can the things that happened cause you upset? Third, and this is where things head out into the left field, it means that nothing of time has ever happened at all. How can anything happen outside you when, being in God, you encompass everything? This means that all those things that have happened throughout the course of your life have never really happened. It's like that line in The Matrix where Neo says, "I used to eat there, really good noodles. I have these memories from my life. None of them happened." And if none of those things happened, how can they upset you? The resolution for this paradox, you choose those happenings, they never really happened, seems to be the dream idea. You are home in God, dreaming of exile, but perfectly capable of awakening to reality. Let's look at this line more closely. It begins by saying that you are still at home in God, still a part of Him, inside of Him. However, you, of your own free will, have banished this knowledge from your mind. You have fallen asleep in God, and in your sleep have begun to dream. This dream is inherently false because it is the dream of exile. It is a dream of being banished from home that you are having while at home. But more importantly for our purposes, it is a dream that you dream. Thus, everything that happens in it has been chosen by you. All your reactions to those dream happenings are also chosen by you. Everything in the dream is your dream. It's true that in this dream, unlike in your nighttime dreams, the other beings that show up are real, not their bodies, but their minds. But we have to surmise that you only allow them into your dream under the condition that they will play along with your script. And this means that it's still your dream. There is one more final element in that line, but perfectly capable of awakening to reality. You choose to fall asleep to your real location, and so you can just as easily choose to wake up to it. All you have to do is desire it wholly. You just have to remember that it is your will to be awake, and you will be. To take in the message of this section, we have to be willing to seriously entertain that this is what is actually going on. So let's try to do that. Imagine that you are in God right now, so your actual location is not in this body and in this room, but in heaven. Then imagine that this whole life is just a dream that you are having, so that all the happenings are just dream events orchestrated by you, and that all your reactions to those events are likewise chosen by you. Then imagine that being a dream, none of this is actually happening. Finally, imagine that all you have to do is really, truly want to be awake, and you will be. And now we will move on to section 2 of chapter 10, the will to remember God. This section takes the psychological principle we can see at work in this world, applies it at a lofty metaphysical scale, and then brings it back down to earth for its practical application. The principle is dissociation, what it means and how it works. To dissociate something, for instance, childhood trauma, you first need to know it, which means your dissociation is the decision to forget it. You've hidden it somewhere in your mind. Now you are afraid of it returning to consciousness. What Jesus is saying, however, is that you're not really afraid of what you've dissociated. Rather, you are afraid of the fact that you dissociated. Your dissociation was an attack on truth. In your mind, then, you've become someone who attacks truth. Not a happy thing to be. This, rather than the dissociated material itself, is what scares you. The proof of this is that when the dissociated material is finally accepted back into consciousness, it ceases to be fearful. You can look at it more calmly, and as you do, you feel whole again. What was fearful then was not the material itself, but the act of hiding it, for that act made you lose faith in yourself. Jesus takes this fairly mundane principle and applies it at a lofty level. This, he says, is what we did to our knowledge of God. We dissociated this, and this was not only an attack on truth, it was an attack on God. We decided to forget our true parent, and now we fear that he will somehow retaliate for our rejection of him. This attack on God was also an attack on ourselves, since we are part of him. Rather than forgetting something bad had happened in the childhood of our body, we have forgotten our eternal Creator and our very own identity. This is why Jesus urges us to give up this dissociation. Give up gladly everything that would stand in the way of your remembering. This will bring much more than release from fear involved in dissociation. This will bring much more than fear from the, This will bring much more than release from the fear involved in dissociation. It will bring joy and peace and the glory of creation. You will remember God Himself, and you will remember that you are a ray of light in God's mind, protected and sustained by His being. All you need to do is say and mean, Father, I will to remember you. See Lesson 231. And He will give you everything but for your asking. The sense of wholeness that comes from integrating dissociated childhood trauma will be nothing compared to the effects of undoing the primordial dissociation. Now Jesus brings this back down to earth. The practical application of all this is the relinquishment of attack. For in every attack, however small, we repeat our original dissociation from our reality. This is because attack is not part of our reality. It's not really in our nature to attack. Your reality cannot attack. By attacking, then, we are claiming to be someone else. You are specifically teaching yourself that you are not what you are. This is why he says all attack is self-attack. It's a decision to forget who we are and a decision to forget who we are a part of. Suddenly acquiring the will to remember becomes a far more challenging thing. I think it's relatively easy to say, Father, I will to remember you. But it's much harder to admit to ourselves that every time we attack in any way, every time we try to take someone down a peg or just privately belittle them in our mind, we are saying, Father, I will to forget you and to forget my own reality. If we want to remember Him, then we need to will to give up all attack. And that is section 2 of chapter 10, the will to remember God. Section 3, chapter 10, day 139, the God of sickness. I think I'll just include, since there's only one additional, I'll include all of these since it's the whole week's reading. So it's going to be chapter 9 and chapter 10, day 134 through day 140 in this, and it'll include all of week 20. The God of sickness, day 139. I remember writing the illuminated text commentary for this section 10 years ago and telling Greg I was in interpretation hell. I just couldn't figure out what the God of sickness was. This section has long been on my short list of exceptionally hard to understand places in the course. As I read this section today, I'm suspecting I never quite made it out of interpretation hell, because I'm seeing a different interpretation now of the God of sickness. So I'll try that new interpretation on for size in what I write today. The concept of God is that of a being who carries ultimate power. In a similar fashion, the concept of a God, lowercase, is the concept of some kind of being or presence that carries at least some ultimate power. When this section talks about the God of sickness, I'm thinking it means that we have fashioned a concept in which sickness itself is some kind of ultimate power. The true God only shares power, but now we have placed another kind of principle on His throne. This other principle, sickness, does the opposite of sharing. It takes power. It drains all its devotees of health and vitality and energy, leaving them weak and sickly with one foot in the grave. So that's how I'm seeing the God of sickness, as the idea of sickness placed on the throne of God Himself, so that now sickness is in a sense the ultimate power. It now carries the authority to dictate who we are and what our fate is. and it constantly whispers in our ear, telling us how fragile we are and how to avoid endlessly catastrophic health outcomes. Isn't it true that we view sickness as carrying the kind of power that only a God possesses? And isn't it true that we hear that voice whispering in our ear? We don't realize that we made this God, this idol, as a reflection of what we think we are. We think it's the other way around, that our image of ourselves must naturally follow from the nature of our God. Either way, one mirrors the other. Self-image and God-image fit hand in glove. We see our sickness as our ruling deity, and we see ourselves as a sick God, self-created, self-sufficient, very vicious, and very vulnerable. I think it helps to read down that list of 4 items very slowly, realizing that each one fits how we see ourselves. Our identity does seem to be something that we ourselves craft and mold, self-created. Our existence does seem like something we ourselves have to constantly preserve and protect, self-sustained. We seem to have a long list of needs that we have to aggressively meet, very vicious, and we see our little powerless self as constantly in danger of being hurt, very vulnerable. Don't you hate this image of yourself? And don't you hate the things it makes you do? It's strange then that we are so vigilant to protect this image, to save its face. It's especially strange when you realize that sickness isn't foisted on us by the laws of the universe. It's simply the result of seeing ourselves according to this image. Sickness comes from not valuing ourselves, from not realizing that we are literally part of God. Feeling without value, we don't feel whole inside. And this lack of wholeness then gets projected onto our body, which becomes sick. Our job then is to renounce the God of sickness and to renounce our sick image of ourselves. The flip side of this is that we must accept our true value. Accept that we are part of God and that it's impossible for a part of God to be sick. We need, in other words, to place God back on his own throne, to realize that because God is God, only wholeness reigns supreme. Notice, though, that virtually the main emphasis in this section is on healing our brothers of their sickness. Jesus talks about 2 ways in which we can do this. One way is to simply accept God ourselves. As I described in the previous paragraph, he is always accepted for all, and when your mind receives him, the remembrance of him awakens throughout the sonship. The other way is to refuse to give in to viewing our brothers as actually sick. Do not side with sickness in the presence of a son of God, even if he believes in it, for your acceptance of God in him acknowledges the love of God which he has forgotten. By recognizing that this brother is still part of God, we realize that he still has ultimate value. And so we love him. But this is a powerfully affirming love, not a pitying love. By awakening our brother to his real value, this love will heal him in mind and body. By now, after so many sections that feature healing, we should know that Jesus really means it. When we see others as shining with divine value, we heal them. He says quite plainly, you can give up the God of sickness for your brothers. How could he not mean this? After all, isn't this what he himself did? We need to ask ourselves then, how we are when we are around someone who is sick. Yes, we need to say and do all the appropriate things. We need to care about their physical and mental well-being. But while we are doing the appropriate things, are we also actively remembering that this person is a part of God and that part of God cannot be sick? Love it. Okay, now I'm going to read day 40. Section 4, sorry. We have a lot in terms of floating around in this section. Of particular importance are gods and laws, but there actually is a whole picture behind them all. God created us by His laws. His laws have complete sway over us, but rather than this being a fearful thing, it is an extremely good thing because His laws work only for your good. They bring complete protection. They uphold our freedom. They keep our mind in His peace. We, however, have made other gods. What I think this means is that we have taken ideas that are not of God, like sickness, and giving them the status of God. Now the laws of our false gods seem to be the ruling forces in our existence. Their laws impose sickness on us and on the entire sonship. They place us in bondage. They take away our peace. These laws are in fact lawless, and so rather than bringing us order, they bring chaos. And isn't this the world we see? We look around and we see people groaning under various forms of sickness and bondage. No one feels completely safe and completely at peace, and nothing really seems to make sense. It is a world ruled by chaos. The laws that rule this mess seem ironclad, but they are not real laws at all. They and the gods that enforce them are all made by us. Only God's laws exist. There are no other laws besides His. Our job, therefore, is to renounce our false gods. We need to look at the whole mess, the gods, the laws, and the world that results, and see it for what it is. We need to see that it is so unworthy of us that it's impossible for us to really want it. Most of all, we need to see that it's nothing. It never happened. It's not really there. Only once we clear its nothingness from our sight, only once we clear its nothingness from our sight can reality return to our minds. Reality can dawn only in an unclouded mind. Once we lay aside our false gods, we can call upon our brothers to do the same. We become miracle workers who can heal themselves of sickness. We ourselves have stopped worshiping the god of sickness and have listened instead to the Holy Spirit. Our mind can now shine into their minds, weakening the god of sickness and strengthening the Holy Spirit's voice in them. Can you imagine having such a wonderful power? The good news is that you do. The picture of the spark and the great rays in the last paragraph is part of this discussion of working miracles. The idea is that God lit a lamp inside each one of us, lighting it with the same spark. The spark then is the flame inside the lamp. That lamp then throws off great rays, vast rays of light that extend in quiet to infinity. These rays, however, are only truly known in heaven. To learn of these rays, we must start by seeing the spark. That is our job as miracle workers, to see the spark of divinity in everyone. Perceiving the spark will heal. And that is the conclusion of the Course Companion Notes commentary by Robert Perry for Week 20 Study Guide. Thank you so much. I love you. Thanks for joining with me. Bye-bye.